This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Amazon has partnered with a Chinese propaganda arm.
Jeff Bezos was very nice. He was terrific. He solved the problem very quickly, and he did the right thing, and he's a good guy.
Look, I will not speak to the president's relationships with Jeff Bezos, but
Did you know that just days after President Trump announced a sudden 50% tariff on imported goods sold with U.S. shipping labels, rumors began to ripple through Amazon's corridors about a desperate backup plan? What was meant to bring jobs back instead set off a frenzy that even the most seasoned e-commerce veterans couldn't ignore, and you're about to hear why. Amazon started in 1994 as an online bookstore. By 2024, it was America's biggest retailer, pulling in over $280 billion in U.S. sales and running more than 100,000 fulfillment center jobs. Its network reached every zip code, and Prime deliveries were practically a public service. Then, on May 5, 2025, Trump signed an executive order. Any imported item over $20 would now carry a 50% tariff. Almost instantly, Amazon's share price moved from $3,100 to $2,450 in just 2 days. That's a 21% drop. Enough to make even Wall Street's hard-nosed traders sit up and take notice. Analysts cut Amazon's 2025 U.S. revenue forecast by $35 billion, saying these new costs would eat right through the company's profit margins. Suppliers who made steel racks, packing tape, even warehouse snacks felt the pinch, and small trucking firms that hauled Amazon freight watched their routes vanish. In Detroit, more than 500 fulfillment center employees got layoff notices within 3 days. In Texas, local partners saw orders for storage bins and conveyor equipment slashed by 60% overnight. Parents who once relied on those steady wages for rent and groceries suddenly wondered how they'd make it through next week. You'll hear more from them in a moment. Behind the scenes, a senior Amazon employee, who asked to stay anonymous, slipped word of an even bigger plan, moving critical operations north of the border into Canada. Nobody wanted that leak too early, because panic can spread faster than facts. Hold that thought. We'll return to it later.
Hi, Mr. Secretary. So it was reported this morning that Amazon will soon display a little number next to the price of each product that shows how much the Trump tariffs are adding to the cost of each product. So isn't that a perfect, crystal clear demonstration?
At the same time, another storm was brewing. A Punchbowl News report claimed Amazon would start showing customers exactly how much Trump's tariffs added to each product price in its discount Amazon Hall store. That idea drew a public rebuke from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who called it a hostile and political act. Within hours, Amazon officially denied any such plan, saying that's not going to happen. But why would the company even consider it? And what does that denial really mean for you, the shopper? As if that weren't enough drama, Trump himself reportedly picked up the phone and called Jeff Bezos, praising him afterward for fixing the issue quickly and doing the right thing. What exactly they agreed on, and how that private conversation could change Amazon's rules, will come out later in this video. Meanwhile, the real hurt trickled down to you and me. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported a 12% jump in electronics prices by mid-May, adding about $200 to the average household's monthly bill on phones, laptops, and appliances. The Congressional Budget Office warned that U.S. economic growth for the summer quarter could drop by 0.4 percentage points, risking slower wages and fewer new jobs. In Europe, angry officials slapped new tariffs on American soybeans, corn, and dairy, another $6 billion in extra costs each quarter. Back at Amazon headquarters, executives huddled over maps of Canadian logistics hubs, Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver, flagging each city for labor availability, warehouse space, and tax breaks. If they pulled the trigger, they'd keep the flow of goods going, but at the cost of admitting that U.S. tariffs had chased them across the border. Would customers mind their Prime boxes arriving from Canada? And what about U.S.? Third-party sellers, who supply over 60% of Amazon's products and rely heavily on Chinese imports hit by Trump's 145% tariffs. Their margins were shrinking, too, and some already quietly eyed other platforms like Shine and Temu. Legal moves offered a brief reprieve. On May 14th, a U.S. district judge blocked enforcement of the tariff on items sold through platforms rather than direct imports. Amazon rushed to reclassify much of its inventory, buying time until the administration's emergency appeal on June 1st. For a few suspense-filled days, it looked as if Amazon might stay put. But with that appeal looming, every warehouse manager and vendor knew the clock was ticking. So where does all this leave us? If Amazon stays in the US, it may have to pass higher costs to you or run at a loss. If it shifts to Canada, it keeps its margins but concedes market share and adds cross-border headaches. And if that behind-closed-doors deal between Trump and Bezos holds, Amazon could end up with a special carve-out, rewriting trade rules for every online seller in America. A few days after those initial shocks, our anonymous Amazon source confirmed that executives had quietly prepared what they called Operation Redwood. Instead of dramatic presentations or speculative reports, this plan appeared in confidential slide decks shared only among senior leadership. It outlined specific Canadian locations, Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver, chosen for their warehouse facilities, favorable taxes, and available workforce. The document showed cost estimates for trucking goods across the border, notes on customs procedures, and a timeline to shift as much as 40% of U.S. fulfillment volume by the end of 2025. Evidence that this wasn't just theory began to surface in mid-May. A small batch of orders placed from Amazon.com, destined for East Coast addresses, actually left a distribution center near Toronto. The tracking codes ended with "on" instead of familiar U.S. prefixes, and customers noticed delivery routes passing through Canada. There were no alerts or disclaimers. Prime labels and one-day estimates remained unchanged. By routing real orders this way, Amazon could measure extra transit days, customs fees, and customer reactions without drawing public scrutiny. At the same time, the public debate over tariffs flared again. Punchbowl News reported that Amazon planned to show customers exactly how much Trump's levies added to each product price in its discount Amazon Hall store. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called the idea hostile and political, and Amazon immediately denied it, stating, "That's not going to happen." Behind the scenes, sources say Amazon had floated the idea as a way to pressure the administration into granting a special exemption for major online retailers. Then came the private call. According to people familiar with both sides, President Trump phoned Jeff Bezos within 48 hours of the Punchbowl controversy. Trump praised Bezos for handling it the right way and indicated that a carve-out for essential e-commerce operations was on the table. The exact terms of that conversation remain under wraps, but insiders suggest it could allow Amazon to keep most of its U.S. fulfillment centers running without having to execute Operation Redwood in full. All of this leaves Amazon at a crossroads. Proceed with an aggressive partial move to Canada, or try to reclassify inventory under the judge's injunction and hope the appeal fails. In the weeks that followed, Amazon's independent sellers faced a fresh challenge. More than 60% of products on the site come from third-party vendors, many of whom source their goods from China. When Trump's 145% tariffs on Chinese imports kicked in, these sellers suddenly saw their costs skyrocket. One small electronics merchant in Ohio told us his supplier notified him that the price of a single circuit board had jumped by 30% overnight. He scrambled to decide: raise prices and risk losing customers, absorb the cost and lose profit, or move to another platform entirely. Some sellers began quietly shifting inventory to off-site warehouses in Canada, hoping to blend those goods into Amazon's Operation Redwood flow and dodge the steepest levies. Others started experimenting with direct-to-consumer sites or social media shops, testing whether they could bypass Amazon's ecosystem completely. Every choice carried risk. A misstep could land them on the wrong side of customs enforcement or far below the buy box, losing visibility to shoppers. Down on the loading docks, delivery drivers noticed new border crossing routes popping up in their tracking apps. Drivers who once ran purely domestic loops were suddenly assigned runs that included customs inspections at the Peace Bridge in Buffalo or the Windsor Tunnel into Detroit. One veteran driver said the extra mileage and paperwork cut 2 delivery days off his weekly schedule, but he couldn't say whether the pay would cover it. Inside the warehouses, staff learned that some packing stations might be relocated to Canadian facilities as early as July. Frontline workers got memos reminding them that transfer requests would be handled case by case, but no guarantees were promised. In Seattle, HR teams held virtual town halls to answer questions, while union reps in New Jersey pressed management for clarity. Every shift felt like waiting for a final decision: stay in place under uncertain legal protection, or volunteer for a move north and pack up a life around an unfamiliar city. Meanwhile, the courts prepared to rule on the administration's appeal. If the injunction stands, Amazon could keep most U.S. operations running by reclassifying platform sales. If it falls, Operation Redwood might be the only way to keep products moving without absorbing crippling fees. And the carve-out from the Trump, Bezos call? No one outside a small circle knows whether that promise holds or how broad it might be. What happens next will ripple through every corner of the economy. Will Amazon save its U.S. network, or will it quietly rebuild across the border? Will small sellers adapt or abandon the world's largest online marketplace? And what will this mean for your next order? Will you see ships from Canada on your tracking screen? The answers are coming soon, and each twist will reshape how we buy and sell online. Stay tuned, because the next move in this tariff chess game could change everything you thought you knew about shopping in America. By early June, the damage was clear. U.S. consumer electronics prices had climbed 12%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, adding roughly $200 a month to an average household's bills on phones, laptops, and TVs. Grocery chains quietly noted higher import costs too, as tariffs on cheese and olive oil filtered down to store shelves. At the same time, the Congressional Budget Office warned that U.S. economic growth for the summer quarter could shrink by 0. For percentage points, risking slower wage gains and fewer new jobs. Across the Atlantic, officials in Brussels moved fast. In late May, the European Union announced new levies on American soybeans, corn, and dairy products, targeting roughly $6 billion in U.S. farm exports each quarter. French dairy farmers cheered. Spanish olive growers saw an opening. That retaliation showed how a tariff meant to protect American workers could end up hurting them instead. Back in Washington, lobbyists from tech companies, logistics firms, and unions descended on Capitol Hill. They pressed senators and representatives to demand clarity on Trump's promised carve-out for e-commerce. News outlets began to question whether that secret phone call with Bezos was enough to stop the growing wave of higher prices and lost jobs. A group of House members even prepared a draft bill to limit presidential tariff powers on digital and platform-based sales. But it had not yet been introduced. On the ground, customers began to notice small changes. Some Prime Day deals came with fine print notes about longer delivery windows. A few discount items in Amazon's haul section quietly carried slightly higher tags, though no mention of tariff fee ever appeared. Shoppers assumed it was just inflation. Few realized these were early signs of the larger battle playing out behind every search and cart click. What comes next could tip the scales. The WTO panel in Geneva is set to hear the U.S. appeal on June 20th. A ruling in favor of the administration would clear the way for full enforcement of the 50% tariff, pushing Amazon and others to act fast. A win for Amazon could force the White House back to the negotiating table, possibly expanding any special exemption beyond what Bezos and Trump quietly agreed on. Will Amazon salvage its U.S. network, or will Operation Redwood become reality? Can third-party sellers survive without raising their prices? And what will be the real cost for shoppers when all the cards are finally laid on the table? The next developments will decide whether America's biggest online marketplace stays home or goes north, and how quickly your next package finds its way to your door. If you want to stay ahead of every twist, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because when the WTO ruling drops, or when we finally learn the details of that Trump, Bezos deal, you'll want to know immediately. The game isn't over yet. Every click, every order, and every policy move is part of the story. Keep watching.